Issue this week, preventing another problem. After a poll book error caused frustration last election day, Chester County is making changes. I'm sitting down with leaders from both parties to find out what they're doing differently this time around. And primary battle. State Representative Chris Rabb wants to bring his brand of democratic socialism to the halls of Congress. What would that look like, and what would his priorities be if he heads to D.C.? I sat down with him to get some answers. And John Fetterman's future. As some Democrats mull a primary challenge against the sitting Democratic senator, there is a reported push from some Republicans to get him to switch parties. I caught up with Pennsylvania's other senator about his colleague.
NBC10 At Issue starts now.
I'm Lauren Mayk. Welcome to NBC10 At Issue. As voters get ready to head to the polls, officials in Chester County are looking to make sure this time things run smoothly. Things did not run so smoothly for the last election in November, when a poll book error caused frustration and delays for thousands of voters. Polls stayed open late, and 12,000 voters had to use provisional ballots after poll books were printed without including independent and third-party voters for the general election. The county hired an outside firm to do an investigation and has made changes. I sat down with County Commission Chair Josh Maxwell, a Democrat, and Republican Commissioner Eric Rowe to talk about what happened and what's being done to prevent problems this time. Can voters in Chester County be confident that when they go to cast their vote, that they will be able to do so without any issues in this primary?
Absolutely. We've invested a lot of time, a lot of personnel, recruited a lot of staff to make sure we have multiple people looking at every single process that we have, new checklists in place. We think that what happened last general was a one-off. An employee made a mistake, a human error that had disenfranchising things come from it. And that's not what our voters here expect. So we're going to do everything we can to make sure that every voter has a chance to vote this year.
Before we dig into that a little bit more, let me ask you, Commissioner, the same thing. Can voters be confident that when they show up at the polls, they're going to be able to cast their ballot without any issues?
I'm very optimistic that everything will go off without a hitch this spring. We are doing everything we can to ensure that we don't have a poll book error or any other type of error for that matter. What frightened me so much about last November's election is that such an easy mistake to make had such profound consequences. It truly disrupted that election, and so what we're doing now is we're trying to make it way more difficult for such an easy mistake to have such disruptive consequences. However, I will tell you, I just read in the news today that Lehigh County accidentally sent out last year's mail-in ballot requests. So imagine a situation where the voters from 2025's spring primary who requested a mail-in ballot got 2026's mail-in ballots. So you have people who have switched parties in that time, people who have moved out of the county at that time. These are these are such profound and disruptive mistakes to make, and yet they must be rather easy to make. So it's mistakes like that that worry me, but we are doing what we can to prevent it from happening again.
Take me back to that day. How did you find out that there was an issue?
I got a call around 7 a.m. as soon as they opened the poll books and realized that independent and third-party registered voters weren't there. I teach a college class at Lincoln and HBCU here at an 8 a.m. class, and after that I came to this room right over here because we need to make decisions really quickly in terms of getting enough provisional ballots, making sure there were enough at each precinct throughout the county. I suggested we asked for park rangers to come in, get out of the parks, bring their trucks in and start taking those ballots, those provisional ballots, out to all the polls. Got on the phone with Seth Bluestein, my old friend from Philadelphia, city commissioner, seeing what they could do, what leftover provisional ballots they can get out to us. But really there was a leak in the boat. We need to get everyone on the same page, working together to make sure that everyone in Chester County had a chance to vote who wanted to vote that day. And it required a lot more work than we were expecting that day.
And you described part of the process, and that became sort of the issue. It wasn't just the mistake. It was the fact that it took so long for things to be rectified. I mean, I think, you described when you heard about it, I think, according to the report that came out, that
you contracted on this, it was 6:48 a.m. when that error was identified, but it was 3:45 in the afternoon before all the additional poll books to fix the issue were either delivered or were en route. Why did it take so long to fix this?
Getting a file just for independent third-party voters doesn't exist. So we had to work with the Department of State to create that file and then make sure it's accurate. So there's a quality control check-in that was extraordinarily important. We can't have any more mistakes when it goes out again. I think it's important to note that every precinct in Chester County has hundreds of provisional ballots. So in every single precinct in Chester County, in every single year, if there's a mistake somewhere, right, and people fill out a provisional ballot, they turn that in, and that will be checked to make sure that person didn't vote twice and will be counted. So even between 8 a.m. or 7 a.m. and 3 o'clock, every precinct in Chester County had provisional ballots for people to fill out.
In this case, you needed 12,000 of them, though. What do you usually end up using?
A few hundred.
The report that that was done to really dig into what happened and what needs to be done to fix it also highlighted issues beyond that one printing error. It said that it was the result of not a single isolated mistake, but rather simple human error occurring within a system characterized by inadequate training, insufficient safeguards, limited oversight, and structural staffing changes. I just counted 4 things there. I know they cite other issues as well. Have those things been rectified?
I think many of them have, but it's important to measure expectations. Running elections now, what you train for in July could be different than what you do in November, because the law could change very quickly. What happens federally or state that we don't have any control over can change. We are starting to run mock elections. So if someone starts, say, you only have 2 elections a year. So if someone starts in June, the next election is their first one, right? So starting to run these things in August and in September. Practice printing the poll books, even if you're not actually printing them, but at least producing the documents.
This is something that you weren't doing before?
This is something we weren't doing before.
This is new.
This is new. We have to go above and beyond. We're going to receive and develop really amazing training tools, stealing the best ideas from every single county. But it's never 100%. Elections are way too complicated to expect it to be perfect.
You asked about staffing. We are doing our best to beef up staffing in that office. Not just having more staff, but actually giving the staff the tools that they need to execute their jobs well, right? And not just that, also improving the morale in that office. Elections in the modern day are very difficult to run because a lot of election staff feel like they're living under a microscope, and right to know requests come in all the time about every piece of paper that these employees are touching, and so it can be a little difficult for them on a day-to-day basis to live that way in their job. But like Commissioner Maxwell said, we are actually, in addition to improving staffing and staffing protocols, we're going to be pulling 10% of the poll books that are printed and delivered to us by an industrial printer. We'll be pulling 23 of them and manually checking to make sure that they are just right. And I will be there in the flesh flipping through them myself just to be sure.
There's much more to my conversation with the Chester County Commissioners. You can hear what else we talked about on a new episode of my Battleground Politics podcast. It's available wherever you get your podcasts. Primary battle. State Representative Chris Rabb calls himself a Democratic socialist, and he's fighting for an open congressional seat in Pennsylvania. I sat down with him to find out what his priorities would be if he heads to D.C.
This is NBC10 At Issue.
Philadelphia voters are choosing a new member of Congress to replace retiring Congressman Dwight Evans. In this heavily blue district, there is a competitive primary. 4 candidates are in the running. We're sitting down with each of them. You can watch the interviews right now on my Battleground Politics podcast. And here on NBC10 At Issue, we're bringing you parts of those interviews in the order they appear on the ballot. The past 2 weeks, we brought you my interviews with Dr. Ayla Stanford and State Senator Sharif Street. This week, we're hearing from State Representative Chris Rabb. He's held a Pennsylvania House seat since 2017, and he describes himself as a Democratic socialist. What is the most important thing that you would do in representing Philadelphia in Congress if you were to win?
Well, it's important to understand that for the bluest congressional district in the entire nation, that we send someone who's a fighter amidst adverse times. So I believe I'm a troublemaker in troubled times. And to make sure that we stand up for the city and for the nation when it matters most, with a bold vision where it is based on what the people at the grassroots want most, and that's accountability, and that's freedom from the struggle just to survive. We have to start there. Otherwise, it's just talk. People are struggling, and they need to make sure that there's someone who's representing them and not moneyed interests. So I'm really running because I support the many and not the moneyed.
Well, let me actually dig in there a little bit. You identify as a democratic socialist. Tell me what that means. Explain that to people who may not be familiar with that label.
Sure. And, you know, there's labels, and then there's the actual values that most people embrace that may not know. They don't see the connection between the label and their own values. So if you care about, you believe in Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid or public education or interstate highways, all of that is socialism, right? If we just had a pure capitalistic system, none of that would exist. So many of the things that we have embraced for generations are born out of socialist elements that we've included such that we don't even know their origins, that have made our society more equitable. And that's important because what we need to be fighting for is shared prosperity.
There have been a bunch of big endorsements in this race for multiple candidates. You got the endorsement of the Philadelphia Inquirer. You also have gotten a number of other endorsements, including Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who announced just today, as we're sitting here,
yes,
that she is endorsing you. And she and some other people have endorsed you, though, who don't live here. So why should voters here care if they like you?
Well, we're sending someone to Congress to not just represent a congressional district, but to represent the future of the nation, right? This is a federal office, right? This is not a city or a state office. I'm currently on the state level. On the federal level, this impacts all cities, not just Philadelphia. So you want people who are already in Congress, who are part of a movement to put substantive policies into place that will change the material living conditions of Philadelphians and everyone else. So it's entirely relevant that fellow progressives who are in positions of power, who are making policy changes and influencing our party that benefits our city, those endorsements are quite relevant because they're doing the work that I seek to do.
You have talked about abolishing ICE, and you're not the only one. Other people in this race have talked about the same thing. But what I want to know from you is, what, if the country were to do that, what does it look like afterwards? Do you replace it with something? Does someone else handle immigration law enforcement? What happens after that?
Well, I think that's what people have to understand about this conversation is ICE is fairly new. The Department of Homeland Security is relatively new. It was created after 9/11. We've always had issues with immigration, but we haven't always had immigrant detention centers. We haven't had mass thugs splitting apart families until the past couple of decades. But we have had ICE under multiple presidencies. And so even though Donald Trump is taking it to another level in terms of funding and in terms of the level of terror that he has facilitated through ICE, it's been there.
So what do you think it should look like in the future?
Yes. Well, the most important thing is getting rid of what's wrong now and then investing in an immigrant immigration system that is fair, efficient, and humane. And so there's a number of pieces of legislation that are already introduced in the House of Representatives that have been introduced by members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus that we can look at. We also had bipartisan interest in immigration reform in the U.S. Senate under Biden, but Donald Trump weighed in to get those Republican senators to kill it so that he would have a better chance of getting back in office.
So whether it's that legislation or something that you're bringing, can you describe to me, what do you think it should look like post-abolishing?
Yeah. I think that's important. So what should happen is we shouldn't be detaining people, right? Because what people don't understand is coming into this country as an asylee or refugee is not a criminal offense. There's a process by which that happens. So there's no need to detain them, to put them in warehouses and such. That is a new thing that is really driven for corporate profit. But what we need to make sure is that there's a process, that we have more people who can attend to their needs in the judicial system, that there are lawyers who can address them, that there is wraparound services to bring them in and make sure that they have an expedited process so that we can have more people who come in. We can also address amnesty. We have DACA recipients as well to make sure they're included. But all of these things can be done without a carceral approach, without a policing approach to this, because this is something that was mandated after an overcorrection from 9/11. And if we've seen all the terror that's happened since then, it's been domestic terrorism from actual citizens, not immigrants.
Did you take a social media break in 2024 and 2025?
I don't even know what that means.
Just not go on social media, not post anything?
I wish.
Well, did you scrub your ex posts from between March 6th of 2024 and July 8th of 2025?
Yeah, I changed my personal X to my campaign X. So I put up personal stuff. And as someone who is afraid of political violence and putting too much stuff about my family, my kids, absolutely. I'm very, very concerned about both privacy and safety issues. Absolutely.
Certainly understand the family safety. Did you scrub anything political in addition? Did you just scrub that entire time? There's a big piece missing.
Yeah,
that included
I deleted all things that were personal, things that included pictures of my family, because I'm someone who's been in the public sphere.
Just things of your family? What about anything else? Any political stuff?
My politics are well known long before I took office.
Sure.
Yes. So I deleted things that were protecting me and my family and that were not relevant to me as a public servant or as a political person. Yeah.
Not because you had any concern about anything that anyone was going to critique about anything?
I am critiqued every day. I've been in office for 10 years. I've written a book. I have been a blogger. There's inordinate things about me and my positions going back a lot longer than whatever this period was. So I could not take enough time to scrub everything off the internet about me. So yes, that is not related to my political views. And some of my political views on this campaign trail have, perceived to be controversial or concerning to folks. So I can't, there's not scrubbing enough to remove anything that could be controversial, whether it's going on Hassan Piker's show or taking positions on Gaza or any number of things. My whole tenure in office has been to be a relentless promoter of social and racial justice, which always gets a lot of scrutiny from folks. And I've had to accept process death threats, hate mail, so forth, for my entire tenure in office. So there's no scrubbing I could do to keep me out of trouble.
You can see more of my interview with State Representative Chris Rabb, plus my interviews with the other 3 candidates in this race. Just scan the QR code to check out my Battleground Politics podcast.
Fetterman's future. Pennsylvania's Democratic senator is facing criticism from within his own party, and some Republicans are reportedly trying to get him to switch sides. I talked about it with Pennsylvania's other senator, and now Fetterman himself is weighing in. That's straight ahead. During his time in Washington, Pennsylvania's Democratic Senator John Fetterman has at times found himself at odds with his own party. Some on the left are talking about a primary challenge. Meanwhile, a report this past week detailed a push among some Republicans to get Fetterman to switch parties or become an independent. I caught up this past week with Republican Senator Dave McCormick and asked him about his Pennsylvania colleague from across the aisle.
There's been a lot of talk about Senator Fetterman. I know you guys are close.
Yeah.
And there was some reporting even this week about the idea of him changing parties.
Yeah.
What can you tell me about what your conversations have been? Have you talked to him about becoming a Republican or becoming an independent?
I've never talked to him about changing parties. honestly, I feel blessed to have him as my colleague. We've developed a real relationship of trust. I mean, he votes 90% of the time with the Democratic Party. But the thing I appreciate about him, the thing I admire about him is everything that issue comes up, we talk together. What's best for Pennsylvania? We've come together on a lot of things. If there's something I think is good for Pennsylvania, I can talk to him about it. I trust him. And I think the thing about him is kind of unique is he is willing to buck his party, often on issues that I completely agree with him on, whether it's Iran or anti-Semitism or fracking. And that's the thing I appreciate most about him. But I haven't talked to him about his party. I don't know what his political path is or what his strategy is. I just know I feel lucky to have him as my colleague and fellow senator.
Would you want him as part of the Republican Party?
Well, listen, I think it's most important that he decides what he wants. I welcome him, of course. I think he's great, and I trust him, and I don't have to agree with everything in people in my own party or the opposite party. So he's a terrific colleague, but where he sits on the political spectrum and where he decides to go is completely up to him, and I really haven't tried to influence him in any way.
Senator Fetterman put out an op-ed this past week saying he'd be a terrible Republican. He said, quote, being an independent voice that works with the other side to deliver for Pennsylvanians might put me at odds with the party that I have stayed committed to and have no plans to leave, but I will continue to put the Commonwealth and the country first.
This is NBC10 At Issue.
We're back now with a reminder. The Pennsylvania primary election is coming up on Tuesday, May 19th. And NBC10 has everything you need to know before you cast your ballot. We have a primary election guide on our free NBC10 News app and website. There you'll find a preview of the major races, plus help in finding your polling place and where to drop off your mail-in ballot. That does it for this edition of NBC10 At Issue. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day.